Well, hello. Welcome back to another episode of I'm Not Triggered, the podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Purchase, and I'm so glad you're here today because we're going to talk about the 9 signs of borderline personality disorder. I don't want to waste your time, so let's jump in. You have to have a certain number of these 9 criteria to even be considered for a diagnosis by a professional that can do that. There's so much overlap with BPD and so many other mental health things that it's very specific criteria. So if your emotions feel like they're on a violent seesaw, if your relationships feel like they are constantly on fire, and if you look in the mirror and you don't recognize who you see, you're not broken. You might be dealing with a diagnosis called borderline personality disorder. And here's what no one tells you about BPD. It is one of the most treatable mental health diagnoses out there. And in this video today, we're going to cover a very simple, straight up definition of BPD, which is taken directly from the DSM. We're going to go over the 9 official signs from the DSM of borderline personality disorder. And first of all, we definitely can't self-diagnose, right? This is something that has to be diagnosed by a professional. And most importantly, and last but not least, I want to talk about the concrete reasons that BPD diagnosis is actually really hopeful. I know that sounds kind of crazy, right? But stick with me to the end because we're going to get to it. So first of all, BPD is not a life sentence. When I first got this diagnosis, I felt relieved, right? And I felt relieved because I felt like I finally had an answer and I could do something about it. I could find the right therapies. I could find the right medications. I could make the right changes in my life that would support me, right? And set me up for success in my life. But what is borderline personality disorder? At its core, BPD is a pervasive pattern of emotional in general instability. Instability in mood, instability in relationships, and in your sense of self. And this is driven by a profound difficulty with our intense emotions. If you have BPD, you have intense emotions. And the Clinic Cleveland estimates that about 1.4% of adults in the United States alone suffer from BPD. And according to the DSM-5, BPD is defined there as pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, and marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. It's a very long sentence, right? Here's the best analogy I've ever heard for BPD. It's sort of like living with a third-degree burn on your body. A light touch might not really bother somebody who doesn't have this burn, but if you do have this burn, a light touch feels extremely excruciating. If you think about BPD, it's sort of the same way, just emotionally. It's like we constantly have a nerve ending exposed, right? And BPD is not rare. It is not a character flaw, and you are not crazy, right? This is a treatable condition. It's often rooted in trauma and childhood trauma, and we don't know that going into our adulthood. Relationships that are on fire all the time, and we seem to be the common denominator, but we can't quite figure it out, right? We seem to have emotions all the time, no matter what they are, and we can't seem to ever feel like we have a balance. So let's break down what each of these 9 signs actually looks like. Okay? So the first sign is there's these frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. In the clinical description of this sign, or like the abandonment especially, is an overwhelming fear of being left alone or rejected. And that's very important. So this could look like a few things, right? This is texting somebody 20 times when they don't respond to you in 2 hours. This is seeing a slight change in somebody's tone and being convinced that they are about to leave you in their relationships, and maybe they just had a long day. This can lead to us being very clingy and or pushing people away because we are afraid of being left. PD's fear is a core terror specifically about abandonment and being left alone. There's this pattern of unstable and intense relationships. I know I definitely had these. Everyone loves, especially romantically, loves hooking up the first time, right? There's all this energy and there's all of these feelings and it's intoxicating, right? But eventually, all of those chemicals, kind of wear off. But BPD relationship instability is often driven by this intense, oscillating view of the other person, whether that's good or bad. They're either your friend or the enemy. Sign 3, unstable sense of self or identity. So the clinical description here is a markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of who you are. I definitely suffered from this, still suffer from this sense of who I am. I changed my name a few years ago. That's still settling with me. And I can't say that I have a real sense of like a core sense of self. I don't really know what that feels like. If you're with me on this, that's a great sign that you have BPD, actually. It's kind of sad. Um, to know that maybe like some of this emptiness I've been feeling isn't loneliness, but it's this missing of a core sense of self, right? And that's fascinating to think about. And now this can look like a few things, right? This can be being a chameleon where you just fit into every social scene and everyone loves you all the time. You might drastically change your style, your hobbies, your career goals, or your own values depending on who you're with and what community you're spending time with. You often feel like you're wearing masks and that you don't really know who you are underneath these masks. It's a really deep, chronic feeling of just not knowing who you are. This overlaps a little bit with autism. So it can look like autistic masking, but it's not. It's different. The motivation is different. Autistic masking is often a strategy to navigate a neurotypical world, the world we live in. Whereas identity instability in BPD is often in response to trauma, and it's a lack of a cohesive and internal self. Now, sign 4 is impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. Think sex, money, drugs, alcohol, exercising, shopping. Those things, making poor decisions that have negative consequences on our life, and that happens frequently, and it feels like you can't control the urges. That's definitely a sign of BPD. Now, the clinical definition here is acting on impulse without considering the consequences. And that makes sense, right? Now, what this can look like, it's not just like buying something that you don't really need. This is reckless driving. This is having unsafe and dangerous sex or sex in dangerous places. This is binge eating. This is spending sprees that drain your bank account and you don't pay your car payment. Sudden substance abuse, right? This is often an attempt to feel something other than the intense emotional pain or emptiness that we're feeling or that we will feel. Sign 5, there's recurrent suicidal behavior. There's gestures, threats, or there's self-harm. The clinical description here is repeated self-harm or suicidal ideation. Tragically, research shows that BPD has the highest mortality rate of suicide by any mental health diagnosis. What does this look like? Well, obviously, right? Cutting, burning, physical violence, hitting, slapping, things like that. Now, this is not attention-seeking behavior. This is a desperate maladaptive coping mechanism to regulate unbearable emotional pain. Or it's either this or we disassociate, right? So sign 6 is extreme emotional instability. When we say extreme emotional instability, this is like you wake up feeling okay, and then you fall into a suicidal hole, like 5 hours later that you can't seem to get out of for 2 weeks, and then something happens and you feel great again, and it's constantly this cycle. And it's almost always triggered by interpersonal events, especially if there's conflict. I know that I hit my worst spirals when there's conflict in my marriage. Sign 7, there's chronic feelings of emptiness. And the clinical description here is a pervasive and painful sense of being hollow or void. I struggled with this a lot. It's very painful. And it can look a lot like or feels like something's just fundamentally missing inside of you. It's like a boredom, and it's this hollowness that kind of leads you to seek out intense external stimuli. So think drugs, sex, reckless behaviors, right? Sign 8, inappropriate, intense anger, or difficulty controlling your anger. I definitely had this one. The clinical description says frequent displays of temper, constant anger, or recurrent physical fights. Now, I just had frequent displays of temper and constant anger. I felt angry all the time. And this looks like lots of things, right? Explosive rage over something that seems minor to mostly everyone else. It can be intense, biting, sarcastic comments. It can be bitterness and resentment. This anger often stems from a feeling of feeling invalidated, misunderstood, or it comes from a fear of abandonment. Sign 9, stress-related paranoia or severe dissociative symptoms. I did struggle with this one. We're doing much better on this now, I'm happy to say. The clinical description here is when under extreme stress, you may lose touch with reality. That can look like a lot of things, which I didn't know. I thought that disassociation was like you're like just not here. I don't know where you went. That was not very specific, was it? So this can look like a lot of things. You're feeling paranoid that people are plotting against you, or you might disassociate entirely, feeling like you're outside of your own body, watching a movie of your life, or that the world you're in isn't real. That's kind of sometimes how I feel. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that's real. I don't know how to even I know that I'm not. Like I know that I'm not, but it has made it difficult for me to have genuine empathy and compassion for people, actually. So that's a tricky one, and that can be very problematic when you're trying to have, relationships, right? So here's a really important thing here. Do not self-diagnose based off this information, right? It took me a long time to get diagnosed. You're usually not diagnosed until you're in your 30s or 40s because BPD looks so much like so many other things. I got misdiagnosed, beforehand and diagnosed with a lot of separate things. But when you put it all together, this BPD thing makes a lot of sense, right? So diagnosis does require at least 5 of these 9 signs to be a persistent pattern in your life across multiple contexts for a period of time. And BPD also has huge overlap with ADHD, autism, PTSD, TBI, bipolar disorder. And it's one of the most commonly misdiagnosed conditions, especially in neurodivergent women. So professional diagnosis is essential, right? So I did say there is some good news, right? The good news is, and there is good news. And the good news is this is a diagnosis of hope. And that's what I need you to hear. I need you to hear that this can be treated, and I have improved my quality of life phenomenally that's why I started this channel, is because DBT, I did so many other therapies, and DBT is the one that I got my shit together. I feel like an adult on most days. I feel like the version of me that I see in the mirror is a version of me that I like, I'm proud of. I feel more whole. And it's taken a lot of work. It's taken years to get there, but it was worth the work because I feel so much more secure in myself, in my life, and in my emotions. My BPD doesn't run my life anymore, right? I get to make the decisions. And DBT was created by somebody who had BPD and was struggling like I was with like trying everything, but nothing seemed to work. And her name is Marsha Linehan. And this is a kind of new therapy, right? But DBT is that foundation of this channel for a reason. BPD ruined my life. It did. And I don't want it to ruin your life. So I want to give you the tools that I have and hope that, by putting it out here, you can come revisit these anytime you want. You can implement these at any point in your life, these skills that I'm teaching. Just know that you are not too much. Your emotions are not too much. You're not a burden. And emotion regulation is a skill that you can learn. You can. It just takes time. And if this video resonated with you, here's what you should do next. Okay, don't self-diagnose, obviously. You can check out my Substack for more information, or if you really want to read personal essays on what it's like to live with BPD, and subscribe to the channel, right? I'm building a full library of DBT skills that can help you manage your symptoms with your daily life. If you enjoyed this video, but you're curious about having better relationships, you should check out this video next. Until next time, take good care of yourself.